The objective of bowling is to knock down as many pins as possible in 10 frames. The bowler rolls a bowling ball at 10 pins that are set at the far end of a bowling lane. The bowler gets 2 chances per frame to knock down all 10 pins. If all the pins are knocked down with the first ball, it is called a strike. The ball is returned to the bowler, and 10 pins are set up again for the next bowler. If all the pins are not knocked down by the first ball, the ball is returned to the bowler, and the standing pins are left as they are. The bowler then rolls the ball a second time, attempting to knock down the remaining pins. If the bowler succeeds, it is called a spare. After delivery of the second ball, the ball is returned to the bowler, and all 10 pins are again set up on the lane. Originally, the bowling pins were set up by hand, and the ball was returned manually. To improve the sport of bowling, in 1956, Brunswick introduced the Model A automatic pin setter. An improved version called the A2 model was introduced in 1962. Brunswick has continued with pin setter development by introducing the GS10 in 1985 and upgrading to the GS92 in 1992. This is an introductory training tape for the inexperienced pin setter technician. It deals with a Brunswick Model A2 pin setter. As a pin setter technician, your job is critical to the operation of your bowling center. This video is divided into 5 segments: Sub-assembly overview, safety, basic pin setter operation, troubleshooting pin setter problems, basic preventive maintenance. Let's look at the major sub-assemblies of the pin setter. First, the pit conveyor. The pit conveyor moves the pins and the balls toward the rear of the pit. At the rear of the pit is the elevator assembly, made up of the ball and pin elevator wheels. The ball elevator lifts the ball and places it on a track which carries the ball back to the bowler. The pin elevator collects the pins and carries them up to the turnaround pan. The turnaround pan receives the pins and orientates them all base first on the cross conveyor. The cross conveyor carries the pins across the top of the pin setter and places them one at a time into the turret assembly. The turret assembly holds the pins until it is full and then deposits them into the deck. The deck holds the pins until it is necessary to set them on the lane. The deck also lifts any pins left standing after the first ball so that the rake can sweep any dead wood from the lane. The deck and rake are powered by the gearbox assembly. The gearbox assembly also contains the clutch and triggering mechanisms to start and stop the pin setter. The detector assembly, located at the front of the gearbox, senses the status of standing pins and controls the pin setter through the correct cycle. The electrical control box contains the components used to turn on the pin setter motor, lights, and other electrical components. Before working on the pin setter, make sure that you have viewed and fully understand the safety segment. Before we get started, let's talk about the safety procedures to use when working on pin setters. You must always remember to turn the power to the machine off when working on the pin setter. We recommend that you do this by turning the circuit breaker off and by unplugging the power cord from the pin setter located on the pin setter control box. Do not wear loose-fitting clothing or neckties around the pin setter. Wear long hair up. Be sure to remove jewelry and wear safety glasses. Always use the proper tools for the proper job. Keep work areas clean and neat. Always wipe up spills immediately. Use a metal container with a lid to store cleaning rags. After working on the pin setter, always remove tools from the machine and replace all guards before turning on the pin setter. When working on the pin setters, always stand or step on the platforms provided. The steps. Accelerator. Light fixture or machine platform. Never stand on the motor, gearbox, deck lift arms, top platform, or any moving parts of the pin setter. Never reach through rods or frames to clear jams or get something. You must always make sure others are clear of the pin setter before you start it. We do this by calling clear, followed by the lane number you're working on, and then wait for a positive reply before turning on the pin setter. Position the rake in its down position when working on the front of the machine to prevent being hit by a bowling ball. Under no circumstances allow an unqualified person to work on a pin setter. When the pin setter is turned on, the 1 horsepower motor is started. This motor supplies all the mechanical power to the pin setter using 2 drive belts. The rear belt drives the elevators and conveyors used to move the pins and return the ball to the bowler. The front belt drives a friction clutch mounted on the input shaft. This shaft drives the other shafts of the gearbox, which moves the pin setter through its cycles. When the ball is thrown by the bowler, the ball makes contact with the pit cushion. The pit cushion stops the ball, and the linkage triggers the rake to lower and start the pin setter cycling. When the rake lowers, the linkage lifts the pit cushion so that the ball can pass beneath it. The ball rolls into the ball elevator wheel, which spins to lift the ball to the ball track using rubber-covered lift rods. Once on the ball track, the ball rolls into the Y switch and is directed into the ball accelerator. The ball accelerator shoots the ball forward to the power ball lift, located on the lane's approach. The ball lift raises the ball from under the lane and places it on the ball return rack for the bowler. The pins are either knocked by the ball or swept by the rake onto the pit conveyor. The pit conveyor shakes back and forth to move the pins to the rear of the pin setter and into the pin elevator wheel. This wheel lifts the pins to the cross conveyor via the turnaround pan. The turnaround pan accepts the pins either head or bottom first and orientates them into the cross conveyor bottom first. The cross conveyor moves the pins to the turret. On the other end of the cross conveyor is the pin gate. This gate stops the pins from entering the turret until the turret is ready to accept a pin. Also on the cross conveyor are 2 rollers. If the pin gate stops the pins from entering the turret, these rollers will shut off the pinwheel so that no more pins will enter the cross conveyor. The turret accepts 1 pin and then indexes to the next position to accept the next pin. When 9 pins are in the turret and the 10th pin enters the 5-pin chute, the pins will drop into the deck if 3 conditions are met. The deck must be up, empty, and forward. When the pin setter needs to set a new set of pins, the top deck, called the moving deck, shifts to the rear and sets the pins on the lane. A typical pin setter cycle is 360 degrees from start to end. The cycle is divided into 4 equal segments of 90 degrees. Every time that the 4-to-1 shaft rotates 1 turn, that is 90 degrees of the pin setter cycle. The detector 1-to-1 shaft turns once per cycle and has an indicator dial to show where the pin setter is during the cycle. The pin setter uses 4 different types of cycles. Strike. First ball standing pins. Second ball. Out of range. Let's look at what the pin setter does during each cycle. A strike cycle occurs when the bowler knocks down all 10 pins with the first ball. The pin setter will then set up a new set of pins for the next frame to be bowled. When the ball is thrown, the rake drops and the pin setter starts its cycle. The deck lowers to detect and finds that no pins are left standing. This happens at 90 degrees. The deck rises and the rake sweeps to clear deadwood. When the rake in its most rearward position and the deck is up, this is 180 degrees. The rake starts forward and the deck lowers to set new pins. This is 270 degrees. The deck and rake rise and the pin setter stops at 360 or 0 degrees, ready for a new first ball cycle. In a first ball standing pin cycle, the deck lowers to detect for pins at 90 degrees. Finding pins still standing on the pin deck, the detector allows the scissors to close on the pins. The deck rises, lifting the standing pins out of the way, so that the rake can sweep the deadwood off of the lane. This is 180 degrees. The rake comes forward, the deck lowers, and respots the pins at 270 degrees. At this point, the scissors reopen and the pin setter prepares for a second ball cycle. The deck and rake rise and the pin setter stops at 0 degrees, waiting for the second ball to be thrown. The second ball cycle starts when a ball is thrown and the pin setter starts to cycle. The rake drops, like the other cycles, but the deck is held up by the deck holding hook. This is because the pin setter does not need to detect if there are standing pins. At 90 degrees, with the deck held up, the pin setter prepares to set 10 new pins. The rake sweeps any remaining pins on the lane. The rake is back at 180 degrees. As the rake comes forward, the deck lowers to set a new set of pins at 270 degrees. The deck and rake rise and the pin setter stops at 0 degrees, waiting for a new first ball. To get an out-of-range cycle, one of the pins is slid off spot when the bowler rolls the first ball. Instead of the deck lowering to its normal detecting height, the bottom of the deck will land on the pin at 90 degrees. At this time, the pin setter clutch will disengage until the technician manually restarts the pin setter by pulling the out-of-range reset lever. Because the pins cannot be picked up by the scissors on an out-of-range cycle, the rake does not sweep and the deck gets held up by the holding hook for the last half of the cycle. The rake rises and the pin setter stops at 0 degrees waiting for the second ball. Later in the troubleshooting section, you will be shown how to manually start the pin setter and clear deadwood from the lane for an out-of-range cycle. Now, let's look at how to turn on the pin setter. The power to the pin setter is controlled by 2 circuit breakers and 5 low-voltage switches. All 7 switches must be on in order to energize the pin setter. One circuit breaker is in the distribution panel, usually located on the rear wall of the building. The other circuit breaker is located on the pin setter control box. This circuit breaker protects the pin setter and is used to turn the pin setter off and on. The low voltage switches are the manager's switch, located at the manager's control counter. The masking unit switch on the back side of the masking unit. The mechanic switch located on the rear of the pin setter. And the turret jam and deck jam switches. The turret and deck jam switches are safety switches and will shut off the pin setter in the event of a mechanical malfunction. Remember that all the switches must be on to start the pin setter. Next, we need to discuss basic pin setter troubleshooting. All pin setter malfunctions and repairs should be recorded on a stop sheet. Most of the malfunctions you will experience will be an interruption of the pin or ball travel. It should be noted that an interruption of the pin travel may also cause an interruption in the ball travel. Because of this, the pin travel problem should be corrected first. First, let's look at some ball return malfunctions. If a ball is not returned to the bowler, there are a number of possible problems to be investigated. If a ball is stuck in front of the pit cushion, gently lift the deck holding hook to assure the pin setter is on first ball. Then push the reset button. The pin setter will repeat the first ball cycle, lifting the pit cushion and allowing the ball to pass underneath and into the ball elevator wheel. If you have an older pin setter that stops at 90 degrees to wait for a second ball, you must not lift up the deck holding hook to return the pin setter to first ball cycle. On this style of pin setter, you must turn off the rear switch, lift the pit curtain, and lift the ball to the back side of the pit cushion. Turn the rear mechanic switch back on. If the ball is spinning on the ball elevator wheel, carefully push the ball into the ball lift rods. If a ball is stuck half of the way up the lift rods, turn off the rear switch, place one hand under the ball, and pull the lift rods toward you to relieve tension on the ball. Push the ball up onto the ball track and turn on the pin setter. If a pin is wedged in the lift rods, turn off the pin setter using the rear mechanic switch, remove the pin, and push the ball onto the ball track, and turn on the pin setter. If the balls have met at the Y switch, push one ball into the ball accelerator, then wait 3 seconds before pushing the next ball into the accelerator. Waiting 3 seconds between balls will prevent them from becoming jammed in the ball lift up front. A ball may be held up on the even number lane by the ball preference system. To correct this, simply push down on the ball release lever on the odd lane. If a ball is not in the pin setter, you may have a pin in the underground tracking or a jam in the ball lift. If the ball lift is running, you have to check under the ball return capping. Whenever checking or working under the ball capping, be sure to turn off both pin setters. Remove the rear approach access panel and use a flashlight to look under the lane. If a pin is causing the jam, remove the capping section above the jam and remove the pin. Turn on the pin setters and push the ball into the ball lift. If the ball lift is not running, make sure that both pin setters are off and no one bowls. Remove the front access panel and turn off the power switch on the control box. Remove the ball lift hood and push the ball onto the ball return rack. Replace the hood and turn on the switch. If the ball lift did not restart when the switch was turned on, press the motor reset button. Now let's look at malfunctions in the pin travel. When a pin travel malfunction occurs, most of the time the machine will stop at 180 degrees waiting for pins. If pins are jammed in the turnaround pan, turn off the rear switch and pull down the rear of the pan to remove the pins. You may have to rotate the pinwheel backwards in order to relieve pressure on the pins. Use a rag to protect your hand from sharp edges. Before turning the pin setter back on, check to make sure that the motor to gearbox, motor to elevator, and cross-conveyor drive belts are on their pulleys. If the pinwheel is not turning, check to be sure both cross-conveyor rollers are in their proper position, and the levers on the rollers are depressing the cross-conveyor micro switch. If the pins are stopped at the pin gate, simply push the pin into the turret. If the turret fails to move to the next position, push down on the pin in the turret wires. This should index the turret one position. If a pin is caught in the turret wire, turn off the circuit breaker and reverse the turret using the turret spoons. Push the pin back into position and turn the circuit breaker on. Make sure when turning the turret by hand, you use the turret spoons and not the turret wires to prevent damage to the wires. If a pin becomes jammed under the turret frame, the frame will lift and turn off the turret jam switch, turning off the pin setter. Also, if a pin becomes jammed in a deck chute, when the moving deck shifts forward, the deck jam switch will turn off the pin setter. Before clearing either one of these jams, you must turn off the pin setter using the circuit breaker. If you fail to do this, the pin setter will restart as you clear the jam and personal injury could occur. When clearing jams from under the turret or in the deck chutes, it will be necessary to manually back the pin setter down to relieve pressure on the pins and prevent parts damage. First, make sure that the pin setter circuit breaker is turned off. Start by engaging the gearbox clutch Then slowly rotate the motor to gearbox belt in this direction. Now lift up on the deck holding hook while turning the belt to allow the deck to lower. When the pressure is relieved from the pins, remove all of the pins from the deck. Turn on the pin setter and cycle the pin setter until a new set of pins is set on the lane. Make sure to watch the pin setter through a couple of cycles to be sure that everything is working properly. If the pins were jammed under the turret frame, when the turret frame was lifted, the full deck signal may have been released. When the pin setter gets to 180 degrees, it may stop to wait for pins with a full set already in the deck. If allowed to run, the pin setter will drop another set on top of the first set and cause another jam. To prevent this, when the pin setter stops at 180 degrees, turn off the circuit breaker and push forward on the 180-degree interlock link until the gearbox clutch engages. Turn on the circuit breaker and allow the pin setter to set the pins. Another problem you will encounter is the out of range. This is when a pin slides off spot, causing the pin setter to stop. To clear an out of range, pull firmly on the out of range reset lever and allow the deck to come up off the pin. Then quickly turn off the pin setter. Now you may clear the deadwood off the lane. Clear the deadwood by either lifting up the pit curtain and using the pin hook to remove the pins, or by climbing onto the pin setter, turning off the circuit breaker and climbing down onto the pin deck. It is important to stop the pin setter just after the deck comes up off of the out-of-range pin. Now the weight of the deck is supported by the gearbox and the rake is still down to protect you. Occasionally, a bowler may not get the opportunity to bowl his second ball. In this case, the standing pins will have to be respotted. To do this, lock the pin gate by pressing down gently on the gate and releasing. Change the pin setter to second ball cycle by pushing forward on the standing pin selector and cycle the pin setter. If the pin setter does not stop at 180 degrees waiting for pins, change the pin setter to second ball and cycle the pin setter again. Once the pin setter stops at 180 degrees waiting for pins, place the pins that need to be respotted into the corresponding deck chutes. If you need to spot a 5-pin, you may drop it through the 5-pin chute, unless the 5-pin chute is in line with the cross conveyor. If the 5-pin chute is in line with the cross conveyor, you must allow the pin to enter the 5-pin chute and drop the pins into the deck. Then you must lock the pin gate, change the pin setter to second ball, and cycle again. When you have all the pins to be respotted in the deck chutes, turn off the circuit breaker and push forward on the 180-degree interlock link. Turn on the circuit breaker and allow the pin setter to set the pins on the lane. Place the pin setter on second ball by pushing forward on the standing pin selector. Then push a pin into the turret to start the pin travel again. Besides correcting pin setter problems, you will often be responsible for other maintenance duties. Properly performed preventive maintenance will decrease the malfunction rate, prevent major breakdowns, and lengthen the life of the pin setter. Covered in this section will be cleaning the ball elevator wheel, pin elevator wheel, turnaround pan, cross conveyor, snubber, 5-pin chute, and the ball lift rods. To clean the ball and pin elevator wheels, first turn off the pin setter using the circuit breaker or rear mechanics switch. Using a rag dampened with pin setter cleaner, wipe down half of the ball wheel and pin wheel and then wipe with a dry rag. Rotate the ball wheel and pin wheel and repeat the process until the entire surface has been cleaned. To clean the turnaround pan, with the circuit breaker or rear mechanics switch still off, pull the rear of the turnaround pan down, wipe with a rag dampened with pin setter cleaner, followed by a dry rag. When cleaning the 5-pin chute, snubber, and cross conveyor, turn off the circuit breaker and use a rag dampened with pin setter cleaner, followed by a dry rag. The turret 5-pin chute is easiest to clean when it is positioned in line with the cross conveyor. Wipe out the 5-pin chute, being careful not to trip the pin release lever on the bottom. If you do, simply press down on the indexing trip lever and turn the turret to the next position using the turret spoons. Wipe the snubber, then the cross conveyor sides and bottom. Clean the ball lift rods using detergent and water. Wipe and dry the lift rods. Check for the proper number of pins in each pin setter. Brunswick recommends 21 pins in each machine. While doing your maintenance duties, look for loose or cracked parts. Make sure to bring them to the attention of your supervisor. Your supervisor can then repair the broken part before a stop occurs, inconveniencing the bowlers. Make sure to always use genuine Brunswick pin setter replacement parts and supplies when performing pin setter maintenance. Call Brunswick toll-free 1-800-YES-BOWL to place your order with your direct line sales service representative. In addition to viewing this videotape, make sure to review all of the procedures with your supervisor. It is important that you are well trained as a pin setter technician so you can ensure your safety and provide quality service to your bowlers.